So there were three main pillars or directions where we had been working to deal with the crisis. It was this fiscal consolidation, economic stimulus, and social safety network. I will briefly go through all those three directions of work, how we were dealing with the economic crisis. And first, of course, fiscal consolidation. So fiscal consolidation, all in all, between 2008 and 2012, we have done a fiscal consolidation of 17% of GDP, which is huge by any scale, and I think it's still the largest amount of fiscal consolidation done by any EU member state. Well, Greece may be eventually overtaking this, but it's definitely huge by any scale. But what is worth noting is that bulk of this fiscal adjustment came already during the crisis in 2009, and I will come back to this point later. Then to demonstrate some measures of the fiscal consolidation, so roughly 1/3 came from tax raises and 2/3 came from expenditure cuts. Here you see the decrease of the wage bill, which was cut by some 40% public sector wage bill during the crisis, and some 24% decrease in public sector employees. So we were cutting both salaries and also size of the public sector. But this is also clear for us that the public sector, which was excessively built up during the pre-crisis years, could not be sustained during the crisis and also after the crisis. So we decided that we really should how to downsize the public sector quite significantly. To give some figures, so number of state agencies was cut by half. Number of institutions subordinated to ministries was cut by 1/3. And also, for example, number of employees in the ministries was also cut on average by 1/3. On taxes, as I said, 1/3 of the fiscal consolidation came from taxes, and it was pretty much every tax. It's hard to name any tax which was not raised. So VAT went up from 18 to 21%, social security contributions from 33 to 35%, personal income tax, it had its ups and downs, but in any case we reduced personal exemptions quite substantially for personal income tax. Excises were raised pretty much on all goods. Real estate, so we introduced progressive real estate tax for residential property, raised it for unused agricultural lands, and also gave local authorities local governments more authority to deal with this tax. Car taxation increased, introduced capital gains and capital revenues taxes, so really pretty much all taxes with some few exceptions were raised. And on some structural reforms, we did some quite comprehensive structural reforms in education, healthcare, also in defense, and worked quite seriously to cut the administrative burden or red tape. On education and healthcare, luckily we did not have how to invent those structural reforms during the crisis. They were well prepared, well documented on education. The principal money follows the pupil, and on healthcare, so-called master plan. But they were just put aside by previous governments because they didn't look very popular. So eventually what we had to do, we had to take those reform proposals and implement them. Of course, we had to do it in accelerated scale during the crisis, but at least those reforms were prepared, so we just had to implement them. On defense, we also went through quite substantial reforms, in effect moving from 6 commands to 1 command. and cutting quite substantially administrative expenditure in defense sector. And right now this experience in reforming defense is seen as one of the good examples also for NATO. On cutting the red tape, I think probably the most important thing during the crisis was that we managed to somewhat change also the mindset of public administration, that you need to be more open to business, you need to look how to make things easier if we want to really economy to grow and new jobs being created. So there are many measures in different sectors and administrative burden, but I think the very fact that we managed to change the mindset was the most important one. So on budget deficit, here you see the figures. So probably those red lines are the ones to look after, because it's according to ESA 95 methodology used also for the purposes of Maastricht criteria. So we see that we had a budget deficit of almost 10% of GDP in 2009, and that's after the huge amount of fiscal consolidation we did in 2009. This year, budget deficit is down to 1.9%. In fact, it's probably going to be even smaller. And next year, we recently adopted the next year's budget with a deficit of 1.4% of GDP. So basically, in 3 years' time, we expect to achieve both, which was set as a medium-term objective for Latvia's budget deficit, and also the condition in fiscal compact, budget deficit, structural budget deficit below 0.5% of GDP. And as you see, we are approaching it quite quickly. Then the very effect of this internal devaluation program also helped to restore competitiveness. If you look the lines of the real wages and productivity, you saw how hugely they diverged before the crisis, which was one of the effects. We lost competitiveness and one of the reasons why we had the worst economic crisis in EU 27. And now we see that those two are developing in line with each other. And also, if you look at the unit labor costs, you clearly see that Latvia's unit labor costs have moved substantially below pre-crisis levels and are basically staying there for these years, which is also helping us with a restored competitiveness. Then all this fiscal adjustment, regaining of competitiveness, helped to calm down the financial markets. You see the CDS spreads, which were some 1,200 basis points in June 2009, now are something in 120 or 30 or something in that territory. So really we managed to calm down the financial markets, and you see this tendency was very pronounced already since 2010. And correspondingly, also our credit ratings, which were cut substantially during the crisis. Most credit rating agencies cut us to the junk level. Now all credit rating agencies have moved us back to the investment grades. And also FDI flows have resumed back to the economy. You see this fall in 2009. Well, since it's recovering, even though you can also see that it still remains relatively volatile.